I want you to picture a stone castle, okay? It's the middle of a 15th century winter. Snow's coming down, the wind is just howling. But the sound that chills you to the bone is a scream coming from a chamber lit by a few candles. Now, this isn't a battle, this is a birth.
And that right there is the heart of this story. A boy who would go on to found the entire Tudor dynasty is coming into the world through the immense suffering of a mother who was, by any definition we have, still just a child. Her name was Lady Margaret Beaufort, and her age, at this exact moment, is probably the most shocking part of her whole incredible life.
13. She was just 13 years old. Think about that. Her own body wasn't even done growing. And yet here she was in a literal life-or-death struggle to bring an heir into the world. This one single event would go on to define her, it would damage her permanently, and it would set in motion one of the most unbelievable stories of political survival and raw ambition in all of history.
So let's start right there. Because to really understand the formidable, calculating woman Margaret became, we first have to understand the absolutely agonizing ordeal she somehow managed to survive as a young girl.
Okay, so the scene is Pembroke Castle, in the dead of the Welsh winter of 1457. And for 18 excruciating hours, Margaret was in labor. Her physician, a man named Dr. Lewis Carleon, who had delivered babies for everyone from queens to peasants, was apparently terrified. He told her family that her hips were just too narrow, the child was too large, he was convinced it was going to kill her. And while, miraculously, both she and the baby survived, the physical toll was just immense. The ordeal left her with such severe internal damage that it ended her ability to have more children before it had even really begun. At just 13 years old, she was, for all intents and purposes, left barren for the rest of her life.
So, how on earth does a 13-year-old girl end up in this horrifying position? Well, to get that, we have to look at how her life was shaped from the very, very beginning. You see, from the moment she was born, Margaret was a pawn in a very dangerous political game, and her fate was always being decided by the ambitions of other people. Margaret was born with the royal blood of the House of Lancaster, a direct descendant of King Edward III. Now, in 15th century England, that made her both a huge prize and a huge target. Her father died when she was only a year old. Some people whispered it was poison. By the time she was 6, she was already a political asset, betrothed to the son of a powerful duke. But then that duke got murdered and the betrothal was worthless. So they found a new match. And in 1455, at 12 years old, she was married off to a man named Edmund Tudor. And the contrast between them, it couldn't have been more stark. Edmund Tudor was a man in his 20s, a battle-hardened warrior, and the half-brother of the sitting king Henry VI. Margaret was a child. This was not a romance. This was a strategic alliance, plain and simple. The marriage was reportedly consummated immediately, a trauma she never ever spoke of, and within just a few months, the 12-year-old was pregnant.
And you have to remember, all of this is going down against a backdrop of complete and utter chaos. The Wars of the Roses, this brutal, bloody civil war between the House of Lancaster and the House of York, was ripping England to shreds. In that kind of environment, a noble heiress with royal blood like Margaret was more valuable and more vulnerable than ever before.
And then, just when you think things couldn't get worse, they do. While he was out fighting in Wales, Edmund Tudor was captured by enemy Yorkist forces and died. Maybe from the plague, maybe he was murdered. So just stop and think about her situation for a second. Before her son is even born, Margaret is a 13-year-old widow, pregnant with a potential heir to the Lancastrian throne, and her entire country is collapsing into civil war around her.
But surviving childbirth, that was just the first battle. What came next was a separation from her son that would end up shaping the entire rest of her life and her ambitions. So, to keep him safe, her son, little Henry Tudor, was raised by his uncle Jasper in Wales. Margaret, who was herself forced into another strategic marriage just for protection, could only see her only child maybe once or twice a year. Then, in 1471, after a totally catastrophic defeat for their side, the danger became critical. A 14-year-old Henry had to flee England for his life, and this began an exile in Brittany that would last for another agonizing 14 years. Now she's separated from him by the English Channel, with absolutely no idea if she would ever see him again. And something inside of Margaret, her frustrated motherhood, it just transformed into something else. She became a spy master. She built this incredible intelligence network completely from scratch,
She and Henry wrote to each other using fake names, invisible inks, complex codes, all to keep the dream of his return alive. Which brings us to Margaret's evolution, from being a victim of politics to becoming one of its most brilliant and, you could say, ruthless players. She learned how to wield immense power, all from the shadows. I mean, just look at this progression. After Edmund died, she made a very practical marriage to a Yorkist sympathizer, a man named Henry Stafford, basically just to survive. But after he died, her third marriage, that was a masterstroke. She married Lord Thomas Stanley, one of the most cunning political operators in all of England. This was a guy who specialized in backing the winning side at the absolute last second. And this alliance gave her protection, it gave her influence, and it gave her the resources she needed for her ultimate plan.
You know, this quote really gets to the heart of the change in her. That young girl who survived a traumatic birth, the mother who was torn from her only child, she channeled all of that pain, all of that grief into one single, cold, calculating ambition to see her son, Henry Tudor, sit on the throne of England.
So for decades, Margaret played the long game, just waiting and watching, waiting for the perfect moment. And in 1483, that moment finally arrived. When King Edward IV died unexpectedly, his brother, Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, seized power. He had his two young nephews, the rightful heirs, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and then they just vanished. Richard III was crowned king, but his entire reign started under this dark cloud of suspicion and illegitimacy, and for Margaret, this was it. Richard's coup had fractured the other side, creating the exact opportunity she had been waiting for her entire adult life.
And from here, things started moving incredibly fast. Margaret immediately started plotting. Now, her first attempt at a rebellion in October 1483 actually failed, and she was put under house arrest. But even that didn't stop her. 2 years later, Henry Tudor landed in Wales with a small army ready to make his claim. The final showdown was going to be at a little place called Bosworth Field.
And this is where Margaret's grand strategy finally paid off. Her husband, Thomas Stanley, and his brother commanded a huge third army on the battlefield. Officially, they were loyal to King Richard, but they just stood there, undeclared. At the most critical moment in the fight, when Richard III made this desperate charge right at Henry Tudor, the Stanleys attacked Richard. This betrayal, which Margaret orchestrated through years of careful manipulation, sealed Richard's fate and won the crown for her son.
And so, after nearly 3 decades of separation, of exile, of relentless plotting, her life's work was complete. Her son was King Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty. But the cost of that victory, when you see it laid out like this, it is just staggering. A mother at 13, a widow after only 1 year of marriage, 14 brutal years of her son living in exile, where she feared for his life every single day, and in total, 28 years of separation from her only child. Her entire life was just a series of sacrifices, all for this one moment. This really says it all, doesn't it? The physical trauma of her son's birth, that was just the very first sacrifice. She then sacrificed the entire experience of being a mother and really any chance she had at personal happiness for this one singular dynastic ambition. She became the most powerful woman in England, yes, but the price she paid was almost unimaginable.
And that kind of leaves us with this final thought. We remember the Tudors for their power, their drama, the way they completely reshaped the world. But it all started with the scream of a 13-year-old girl in a cold Welsh castle. Which really makes you wonder, what is the true cost of founding a dynasty?